It is an absolute pleasure to be with Patrick Kennedy again. We were together at the Healthy Europe, Healthy Brain Conference in Ireland, and he was at the front end of what was going to be a historic gathering there. But he's got a gathering of his own going on with a newborn child. Give him a big round of applause. Who's 5 months old now, right? To take a minute and to acknowledge the great leadership of the Staglins for their work with the best general in any army anywhere in the world. One Mind has really made a mark. Give the leadership of the One Mind organization a round of applause. And let me try to make a few points that I think are inextricably intertwined with us making disruptive progress in terms of neuroscience. This push for openness is so critically important. I have spent a significant amount of time and energy trying to learn as much as I can about where we are in this process. And Mrs. Staglin was just telling me this great story about a member of Congress in New York having a meal and taking a picture with a bottle of wine. You know, one of the things about a great bottle of wine is that it's terrible if you don't have anyone to share it with, right? And one of the things that we know about sharing is that that's how progress happens for ants and termites and for bumblebees and for humans. This is something we actually have in common, is that working together and sharing, we can make progress. I was at a laboratory at Harvard on one of my lab visits, and I visited lots of labs around the country, and I learned a lot from our great scientists. But I was at this lab, and they were looking at infants and how they seem to have a natural innate ability to understand the notion of sharing. And when we talk about research and making progress, it's clear to me that when we look at the 600 plus diseases and disorders that affect the brain, when we think about the World Health Organization in its indication in one of its latest reports that well over 1 billion people worldwide suffer from a brain-related disease or disorder. Or in our own country, the National Institutes of Health indicating some 50 million plus Americans have been afflicted in some form or fashion. When you think about the cost to families and to the opportunity costs of these diseases and the financial costs to our government, it is quite clear that whatever progress we've made has been overwhelmed by the dearth of progress in figuring out the actual cause, what effective treatments or prevention therapies might exist. So there's a lot of work, a lot of what I call runway room for us to make progress here. But one of the critical elements of this is going to be changing the paradigm in terms of how research data and patient data. And I came in here, I saw a friend of mine, James Gadavin. We've been doing a lot of work together, representing the science advisor for the European Union. One of the fascinating things that we can learn from our great allies in the European Union is this effort to use big data as a part of the frontline attack here. You know, through the joint clinical trial effort, which has brought together dozens of nations, including Israel and Canada, along with the European Union countries. It's something that the United States should join in on, I think, and I think we should have an impulse in that direction. But throughout this effort, we need to be having a sense that not only should research being shared, dinner with Deval Patrick, the governor of Massachusetts, the work that they've done there to put together a state consortium of academic institutions and pharmaceutical companies to have pre-competitive open source sharing of information is a model that we can literally build on. And we can think about how we can utilize such a model to move forward. But let me take a few minutes on this issue. One is that we're at a point in which they're actually, let's just start on the patient side. There's really going to be data that we can share. It's not just scribbled by some doctor in an illegible form somewhere in which no one can see, but there's going to be, through the electronic health records mandated in the Affordable Care Act, real data that's going to be electronic and that we can share. That'll be critically important for understanding how various incidences play out in the mental health space. The general and I we were together just a minute ago on Capitol Hill. On the last day that we were in session on Friday, we had a forum. I host with AAAS briefings supported by the Dana Foundation every month on the Hill, trying to make sure that members of Congress become as informed as Patrick Kennedy on these issues, because I think policymakers need to have more information. And we had a forum looking at 2 evidence-based approaches to post-traumatic stress that the evidence is clear work and that are not being widely utilized today. So we need to make sure, and this happens across a spectrum of activities in which there is information, but that somehow it's not getting in the hands of those who are, in a position to have an impact. So we need to look at on the patient side. We also need to talk, and I know you spent some time on this question about the research side. There's some questions about what the various rules of the road are in terms of buy-dole. All I can tell you is that given where we are, we need to move aggressively into a posture in which whatever interpretation one has, that it should be an interpretation towards openness, towards sharing, and in terms of appreciation that the facts on the ground are that we need to make progress sooner, quicker, and that many of these individual challenges that we're looking at may have some common origins, that whether it's a misfolding prion or whether there's a certain trigger points in the neuronal networks in the brain, that we need to, even though we may be looking at a particular area or a particular disease or disorder, that the truth is that we may actually stumble across something important in some other area. In fact, don't let it go outside this room, but most major scientific discoveries happen in large part when someone's chasing some other object of their affection, and then they discover something, right? So we need to have a much more open platform. When there's public financing, clearly there should be a very strong impulse towards open access to the data. First of all, I've been to some of the very best labs. I was going to say the best, but you have to be careful because I may not have visited every lab there is yet. But you can't find a laboratory where neuroscience is the focus, in which they have the resources or the time or the talent to review all of the data that they accumulate when they are doing the work that they are focused on. So making available that data so that other scientists and researchers can review it for maybe different or similar purposes has a great deal of utility in terms of ushering forth the day in which we can have more significant breakthroughs in a more efficient and effective manner than we would have otherwise. So we want to make sure that the data is available when it's publicly financed and that's available for other researchers, and there's no reason for that not to happen. And the second thing is that there is a cross-fertilization that can take place with researchers. So when I visited a lab at Carnegie Mellon and at University of Pittsburgh, and you saw great work being done, I I saw great work being done where I saw a young lady who had a disease that robbed her of control of any of her motor skills. But take her artificial arm and give me a high five and a fist pump, utilizing her thoughts. But this is not dissimilar from the work that, and is connected in large measure to the work being done in laboratories in Stanford and at MIT, in that there are things that people will and can learn from collaborating. And scientists have had a notion of collaboration for a long time. We need to have the institutions of government work in a more cooperative fashion. When I created the interagency working group through the initial spending bill, there was some concern that there would be turf battles between some of the federal agencies. I'm impressed that none of that actually took place. What we saw was NIH and National Science Foundation at the helm, and we saw almost 18 other agencies working together to come up with a blueprint to move forward. I thought the extraordinary leadership provided by OSTP and Dr. Rubin was really an amazing accomplishment over a short period of time. The Congress is ready to work on this issue in a bipartisan fashion. There's been nothing but bipartisan support for the Neuroscience Initiative. What we just want is a roadmap about what we need to invest and where we need to invest, and to make that as plain as possible. And I think we also want to see that it is that we're bringing the full range of entities that we need to bring to bear on this. So the National Science Foundation, I believe, is critically important to the efforts, particularly related to mapping the human brain and understanding cognitive science. And I think there's a correlation as we stretch over to on the post-traumatic stress side in this area, based on the limited amount of information that I've been able to gather. And I think the Science Foundation needs to be brought further to the forefront. And I also think that we need to be working towards international collaboration in a way in which we can, I'm very interested in the brain mapping initiative, both in the EU and the United States, but also stretched across the world from Israel to Australia and many other places, Spain. There's great research that is being done, and it has been done, and we need to incorporate into our desire for openness and ability for us to work with people across the globe, because my sense is that this is, as Alan Lester said in the Science Magazine editorial, this is the neuroscience moment. This is our opportunity in which the country is ready. There's an impatience exhibited and articulated, I think, best by the general when he speaks about this in terms of not just the needs for returning members of our military, but how this really stretches across the population, and that there are people whose lives can be made more meaningful and purposeful through this work. And there's no reason for us to, for everyone to be kind of in their own narrow parochial space or niche. We need to be working together. We have to, as I think about it, kind of raise our vision above the paperwork on our own desks and kind of think about this in a broader sense. And so this is a moment in which we can make progress, and I think that this summit and actually the origins of this organization represent the basis under which progress truly will be made, because pushing to bring into the kind of clearer view the role of agencies like the Food and Drug Administration and others in this pipeline is very important, and to really say that as a nation that it's not enough for us just to hope that in some corner somewhere at some university that someone's going to discover the cure for all that ails the human brain, but that we really have to have a national imperative that at the very forefront, and this is what I've decided. Now, I'm the lead science appropriator for the federal government for my team. I've decided that neuroscience is a superior among all the other equal things that our government ought to be focused on. And when we launch the James Webb Telescope in 2018, it'll be an $8 billion enterprise. It's going to be a wonderful telescope. Now, it was originally priced, you might want to, if you're sensitive, you might want to step out the room for a minute. But it was originally priced at about $400 million. It'll be $8 billion when it lifts off. Now, I'm for big science, and I'm for the Webb telescope. But I saw one of the world's leading neurosurgeons walk out of an operating room. The operating room, they told me, was state of art. It was donated by a family foundation to a local hospital, the Faber Foundation. It was a $15 million operating room. They operated on this young man's brain, and the doctor walked out, and I said, well, I'm trying to figure out, what we need to be doing so that you can be more successful. And he was, we were standing right outside the operating room, and I had viewed the operation, and he said, well, I need better imaging tools. And when he said that, I was thinking about this telescope, and this $8 billion, and I was trying to reconcile our priorities. And when I went over and visited the NICO Center at the National Intrepid Center, we were dealing with post-traumatic stress, and I was looking at some of the great work that was being done. It's amazing to me that had to be built with fundraised dollars, even though it's great that people would write a check for such a great cause. I just think that what I've decided is that we need to put this at the very forefront of our work, right? In that if we want the public to be for investing more in science, we need to make science more relevant in the lives of the American public, right? So when you are sharing that glass of wine later on today, well after all the sessions are over, let us keep in mind that what we have to build is this shared consensus that diseases and disorders of the brain are no longer going to be the last remaining mystery, that we're going to figure this out. Now, there's a big challenge, and you can think about it in any way you want to think about it, but the way to think about how great a challenge this is that with somewhere upwards of 100 billion neurons, we don't actually know how the brain works. And in a little worm with 302 neurons, we don't know how the brain of the worm actually works. So we have a long way to go in terms of figuring out the human brain. But when I stood on the floor of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California, and I watched the Mars rover land after 8.5 months of travel, I figured something out, which is that we have the capacity to do this. We have to have the political will to insist that it be done, and that it be done now on behalf of the tens of millions of Americans who are suffering from all manner of diseases and disorders, and on behalf of the tens of millions of others who will benefit from this knowledge. And we need to do that, and the only way to actually do it is to do it together, working together each and every day, linking together 100,000 plus neuroscientists in a way in which they can interact, figuring out a language that makes sense so that we can at least delineate what the diseases are in which they're not, because we don't even have a complete agreement yet on what various diseases of the brain are, what we want to call them. And then we need to broaden the base. We don't have to pass any laws to enlarge the base of clinical trials and to share. There are things we can do, and we're going to do, and I'm going to be here with you over the next decade to see that we get it done. Thank you.